It started with something small, something so ordinary that Daniel almost laughed at himself later for not noticing sooner. A simple envelope, white, thin, tucked halfway under their doormat on a Tuesday morning. He thought it was junk mail at first until he saw the handwriting. It wasn't addressed to him, it wasn't even addressed to anyone. Just one word written in bold blue ink across the front: return. He frowned, picked it up, and felt something inside paper, maybe a document. When he tore it open, a familiar word jumped out at him before he even processed the sentences. His wife's name. Melissa Harper. At first, that didn't mean much. Melissa was a realtor after all. She handled leases, contracts, listings, all kinds of paperwork, but something about the tone of the document felt off. It wasn't one of her usual forms. The letterhead belonged to Willow Court Apartments, the complex they themselves lived in. Daniel blinked confused. He read again. Lease agreement between Willow Court Management and tenant Michael Torres, hereby acknowledging co-signature by Melissa Harper. Co-signature, his wife had co-signed their neighbor's lease. He laughed softly, thinking it must be a mistake. Maybe the management reused her name somewhere, or maybe she helped someone fill out a form. But as he stood in the doorway, eyes drifting across the hall toward apartment 3B, Michael's unit, a strange heaviness settled in his chest. Melissa had never mentioned it. That night at dinner, he brought it up casually, spinning his fork in his pasta. "Hey, funny thing, I found a letter outside, some kind of lease paper, your name was on it." Melissa froze just for a second, a blink, a twitch in her left hand as she reached for her glass of water. "Really?" she said, smiling too quickly. "That's weird, maybe one of my clients dropped something, I'll check tomorrow." Daniel nodded, but the moment hung there unspoken, stretching longer than it should have. Her eyes darted down, pretending to check her phone. The conversation died. That night, when she fell asleep beside him, breathing softly in the dark, he stared at the ceiling for hours. Something about her reaction didn't sit right. The way her hand trembled slightly as she held the fork. The way she changed the subject to a TV show right after. By morning, he had convinced himself it was nothing. People misread situations all the time. But when he stepped into the hallway to grab the newspaper, he saw something else, an envelope under another door. Apartment 2A. He glanced around. The hallway was quiet, the same handwriting, the same white envelope, and again just one word: return. His stomach tightened. He hesitated, then knocked on 2A. No answer. He waited, glanced around once more, then crouched down and lifted the corner of the envelope just enough to see a letterhead peeking through: Willow Court Apartments. His heart began to pound. That afternoon, he waited until the hallway was empty and went downstairs to the mailroom. The building manager, Frank, was there sorting letters behind the desk. Frank was a big man, red-faced, always smelling faintly of coffee and cologne. "Hey Frank," Daniel said, trying to sound casual. "Weird question, are you the one who sends those return envelopes?" Frank looked up, puzzled. "What envelopes?" "The white ones with the blue ink say return on the front." Frank frowned. "Never seen those, sounds like a tenant-to-tenant thing. Why?" Daniel hesitated. "No reason, just curious." But the look in Frank's eyes told him he had touched something private. Frank's voice lowered. "If someone's passing around papers like that, it's not through me." Daniel nodded, thanked him, and left, but not before glancing at the stack of leases on the desk behind Frank. One of the top pages was visible for a second, and in the signature box next to the tenant's name was that same looping, elegant handwriting: Melissa Harper. He froze mid-step. That night, Melissa came home later than usual. She said she was meeting a client about a condo in Maple Ridge. Her lipstick was smudged. Her perfume was stronger than usual. When Daniel asked how it went, she smiled too widely. He forced a laugh. "You sure you're not signing everybody's leases lately?" She laughed too, but her eyes didn't match her mouth. The following day, Daniel took the morning off work. He had one goal: to understand what the hell was going on. He walked through each floor of the complex, pretending to check his phone, pretending to be just another tenant. But as he moved, he saw it: white envelopes under almost every door. Return, return, return. He counted them, 12 apartments in total, and each envelope identical. That evening, when Melissa said she was heading out for another showing, Daniel followed. He kept a safe distance, tailing her silver SUV as it turned out of the complex and down toward downtown. She parked near a cafe, nothing suspicious so far, but then a man approached her. Tall, early 40s, dark hair. Melissa smiled. He hugged her. Not a client's handshake, a hug. Daniel gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. He watched as they went inside, laughing softly together, heads close like lovers who had long ago stopped hiding. He didn't follow them in, he didn't need to, something inside him had already begun to splinter. When Melissa came home that night, Daniel said nothing. He cooked dinner, asked about her day, smiled when she spoke, but as she walked to the bedroom, he quietly slipped her purse from the counter and checked inside. There were multiple keys on her keychain, 5, maybe 6, some tagged with colored stickers, and then, tucked in the inner zipper, a small flash drive. He put it back before she noticed. The next morning when she left for work, Daniel called in sick. He plugged that flash drive into his computer. There were folders labeled with apartment numbers. 2A3B4C. Each folder had a PDF, a lease agreement. And each one was signed twice. Once by the tenant, and once by Melissa Harper. He scrolled through them in disbelief. 12 apartments, 12 tenants, and all of them shared the same cosigner, his wife. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Each lease also contained a secondary emergency contact, the same name every time. Daniel Harper. His own name, his number, his address. It was as if Melissa had built an entire web of fake connections between them, linking him to people he barely knew. A chill ran down his spine. What was she doing? Why? He printed a few copies and kept them hidden in his drawer. That night, he asked her one question, trying to sound offhand. "Hey babe, do you ever handle leases for this building, like for other tenants?" She froze again, just like before, then she smiled. "Sometimes I help people renew. Yeah, it's part of my realtor license." "Why?" He nodded, just wondering. But his heart was pounding. Days passed. Daniel tried to act normal, but paranoia had already taken root. He began noticing little things, tenants whispering in the hallways, Melissa's phone lighting up with messages late at night, names he didn't recognize, first names, no last names. Once he picked up her phone while she was in the shower. One text stood out. From MT. "Thanks again, Mel, you saved me. I don't know what I'd do without you." He scrolled up. Another message. "You sure he doesn't know?" Melissa's reply, "He won't, he never looks." The phone slipped from his hand. That night he couldn't eat, he couldn't even look at her. Every word she spoke felt rehearsed, like lines she'd said before to someone else. Finally, unable to take it anymore, he waited until she fell asleep and went out. It was nearly midnight, but the hallways were silent and still. He crouched near one of the doors, apartment 3B, Michael's place, and listened. Voices, laughter. He knocked once. The laughter stopped, footsteps approached, and Michael opened the door slightly, his face pale when he saw who it was. "Hey man," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "Sorry to bother you, I think some of our mail got mixed up again." Michael hesitated, then opened the door a bit wider. Daniel glanced inside and froze. On the counter, under a flickering light, was a stack of documents, leases, with Melissa's signature. Michael noticed his gaze and quickly grabbed the papers. "Look, man, I think you should talk to your wife." Daniel's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" Michael shook his head. "Just talk to her, please." He shut the door before Daniel could say another word. Daniel stood there for a long time, trembling, staring at the wood grain of that door as if it could explain anything. When he finally went back to his apartment, Melissa was waiting at the table. Awake, her eyes red, her face tight with something between fear and exhaustion. "Where were you?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer. She stood up, crossed her arms. "You've been following me, haven't you?" Silence. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling now, "you don't understand what's going on." "Then explain it," he said coldly. "Because your name is on every neighbor's lease, every single one. What the hell are you doing?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" She didn't answer right away. She sat down, covering her face with her hands. "You remember last year when we almost lost the apartment, when the rent went up and we couldn't afford it?" He nodded slowly. I made a deal, she whispered. With the property manager. He said if I helped him fill the empty units, get tenants in faster, he'd give us a discount, but he needed a guarantor on file for each lease, so I used my name and yours. Daniel stared at her stunned. That's illegal, Melissa. She nodded, sobbing softly. I know, but we were desperate. I thought if I could stabilize the building, we'd have a permanent discount, maybe even an ownership stake someday, he promised. Daniel leaned back, breathing hard. Who promised? She hesitated. Frank. The building manager. Daniel's mind raced. You're saying Frank's behind this? She nodded. He said it was temporary just until the new leases processed officially. But then he started making me do more. He said if I stopped, he'd report everything. He'd have us evicted. Daniel stared at her, trying to read the truth behind her tears, but something still didn't fit. The secrecy, the meetings, the texts. Is that all, Melissa? He asked quietly. She looked up. What do you mean? Michael, the guy in 3B, what's your deal with him? Her lips parted but no sound came out. She looked away. Melissa. She shook her head, whispering, please don't make me say it. He felt the ground tilt beneath him. So it is something. Her eyes met his, then full of guilt, pain, and something darker. I never meant for it to happen, he helped me. When Frank started threatening me, I didn't know what to do. Michael said he'd talk to him. One night Daniel slammed his fist on the table. Stop. Tears streamed down her face. I swear it's over, Daniel, I swear. He stood there in silence, staring at the woman he thought he knew. The woman who, somehow, had entangled their names in a dozen secret leases, in affairs and lies that now hung between every wall of their building. She reached out to him, trembling. Please just trust me, I can fix this, just give me 1 week. He stepped back. You've had a year. She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Daniel walked to the window, staring out at the glowing rows of apartment lights across the courtyard. Each one, he thought, was another secret, another piece of his life he didn't know existed. And as he stood there, watching the shadows move behind those windows, he realized something chilling. Melissa wasn't the only one who had been lying. Because earlier that day, when he'd checked those digital files, one of the leases had a signature he hadn't mentioned to her, one more name that didn't belong. And that name was his own handwriting. Yet he had never signed it. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the bed long after Melissa had cried herself to sleep beside him, staring at the pale rectangle of moonlight on the floor. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. His signature, his name, on a lease he'd never seen before. He went over it in his mind again and again. The file labeled 5D PDF, a tenant named Lydia Crane, the same date Melissa claimed she'd been out showing houses, the same looping signature in his own handwriting, but he hadn't touched a pen that day. He hadn't signed anything in months. He couldn't explain it unless someone had forged it. By morning, his chest felt tight with exhaustion. Melissa was already gone when he woke. Her side of the bed was cold. He dragged himself to the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and tried to breathe through the knot in his throat. The thought wouldn't leave him alone. Someone had copied his signature. Someone had used his name, and if Melissa wasn't the one, then who was? At 9 a.m., he went straight to the building office. Frank's door was locked. Through the glass, Daniel saw stacks of files, a flickering computer screen, and a half-drunk mug of coffee sitting on the desk, but no sign of Frank. The maintenance worker Rick passed by with a toolbox. Daniel stopped him. Hey, you seen Frank today? Rick shrugged. Not since last night. He left early, seemed in a hurry. Daniel frowned. In a hurry for what? Rick looked uneasy. I don't know, man, but he said something weird before leaving, said this place was about to blow wide open. Then he laughed. Daniel's stomach turned cold. He thanked Rick and walked away, but his mind was racing. If Frank knew something, maybe he'd been the one using Daniel's name. Maybe Melissa was telling the truth, at least about part of it. He decided to look for Frank's address. It wasn't hard. Frank had once bragged about owning a small house on the other side of town. Daniel found it listed online just a few miles away. He drove there before he could talk himself out of it. The street was quiet, lined with aging maple trees. Frank's truck was parked crookedly in the driveway. The front door stood ajar. Daniel's pulse quickened. He knocked once, no answer. He pushed the door open slowly. Frank. Silence. The smell hit him first, stale beer, cigarette smoke, and something faintly metallic. Papers were scattered across the table, lease forms, copies, his wife's name on most of them. But as Daniel stepped inside, he noticed something else. Pinned to the corkboard above the desk were photos, printed from a phone, slightly grainy. Melissa. Smiling, talking to tenants, handing out keys, sitting beside Michael at the cafe. And in several of those pictures, Daniel was visible in the background on his balcony, walking to his car, standing by the window. Frank had been watching them both. He moved closer to the desk, hands trembling as he sifted through the papers. At the bottom of one stack, he found a manila folder labeled Harper Confidential. Inside were copies of IDs, his driver's license, Melissa's license, even their marriage certificate. And beneath those, a fake lease agreement nomming Daniel Harper as property co-sponsor. He scanned it, horrified. It was a legal document that made him financially responsible for every tenant in the building, every late payment, every eviction, everything. And all of them tied back to him. Frank had forged his signature, probably using old documents, maybe even with Melissa's help, though he couldn't be sure anymore. A creak behind him made him freeze. "Didn't think you'd find this place so soon," said a voice. Daniel spun around. Frank stood in the doorway, sweat on his forehead, eyes dark and sharp. "You broke into my house," Frank said flatly. Daniel held up the folder. "You forged my name, you used my identity to run this scam." Frank chuckled. "You think I did that alone? Your wife was in deeper than you know." Daniel took a step closer. "She said you forced her." Frank smiled. "Of course she did." There was something cruel about that smile, like a man who enjoyed holding secrets over people. He walked past Daniel, grabbed a beer from the counter, and twisted the cap off with his teeth. "You know what I like about people like you," he said, sitting down. "You think you can smell lies, but when your own wife's the one weaving them, you just get lost in the perfume." Daniel slammed the folder onto the table. "Tell me the truth." Frank leaned back. "All right, here's the truth. Melissa came to me first, not the other way around. She said she could fill the building faster than any ad campaign. She had this whole plan, sign the leases herself, make it look like occupancy was full, and then resell the property once the valuation shot up. She'd take a cut, I'd take a cut. It was brilliant." Daniel stared at him, trying to process it. "You're lying." Frank grinned. "Am I? Check the timestamps on those files. She created them on her laptop, the one in your living room." Daniel's throat felt dry. He remembered the folder names, the formatting, exactly the same across all the documents. Frank stood, towering over him. "You were just a name she needed, a husband to make it all look legitimate. She forged your signature herself, but when I caught on, I wanted a piece. So yeah, I blackmailed her. She didn't cry because she was scared of me, Harper. She cried because she got caught." Daniel's world tilted. He felt his pulse roaring in his ears. "Where is she now?" he demanded. Frank shrugged, "Probably cleaning up her tracks. She's smart like that, smarter than you." Something in Daniel snapped. He lunged forward, grabbing Frank by the collar. "You're going to tell me everything right now." Frank just laughed. "What are you gonna do, hit me? You're already in deeper than she is, your name on every file. When this comes out, the cops are gonna knock on your door first." Daniel released him slowly, breathing hard. The reality of it hit him like a brick. He couldn't just go to the police, not yet, not until he proved who had really created those documents. Frank smirked and took a swig of his beer. "If I were you, I'd start packing, because when this goes public, you're done." Daniel turned and left without another word. His head was spinning. He got into his car, gripping the wheel, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. If what Frank said was true, Melissa had started everything. The leases, the forged names, even the illusion of tenants filling the building. But then another thought crept in. Why were there real people living there now? People who'd paid rent, who had lives? If it started as fake paperwork, how had it turned into something real? Back at the apartment, Melissa wasn't home. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He paced for hours, checking the window every few minutes. The sky outside turned orange, then black. At last, around midnight, headlights swept across the wall, her car pulling in. He met her at the door before she could even close it. "Where were you?" She froze, clutching her bag. "Out with a client." Frank's house says otherwise. Her face went pale. You went there. I found everything, Melissa, the leases, the forged documents. He says you started this. She dropped her purse, trembling. That's not true. Then tell me what is. For a long time she just stared at him, her chest heaving. Then she whispered, you wouldn't understand. Try me. Tears welled up in her eyes again. It wasn't about money, it was about protection. Protection from what? She stepped closer. From him. Frank. She shook her head slowly. No, from someone else. Daniel blinked. Who? She hesitated, then walked past him to the table, pulling something from her bag. A small black notebook, worn and creased. She opened it and slid it toward him. Inside were addresses, names, payment records, and at the bottom of each page, a signature that didn't belong to Frank or Melissa. It belonged to someone named Blake Harlan. Who is this? Daniel asked. Melissa swallowed hard. He's the real owner of Willow Court. Frank works for him. He's been laundering money through fake leases for years. I found out by accident when he asked me to process a listing. When I confronted him, he said if I didn't cooperate, he'd frame you. He had copies of your ID, your license, everything. Daniel's mind reeled. So you played along. I had no choice. I thought if I kept things running, I could buy time, find a way out. But then Frank got greedy. He started watching us, taking pictures, threatening to expose everything. Daniel stared down at the notebook. Each page was a confession, a paper trail of fraud, but the name Blake Harlan meant nothing to him. Melissa's voice broke. I was trying to protect you, Daniel. If they pinned it on you, you'd go to prison. I couldn't let that happen. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to, but every lie she'd told before echoed in his head like static. Then why didn't you tell me? She closed her eyes. Because the less you knew, the safer you were. He slammed the notebook shut. You sound just like him. Silence fell between them, heavy, suffocating. Finally, she whispered, there's one more thing, you're not the only one whose name they used. Daniel looked up sharply. Check the lease files again, she said. There's one apartment you missed, 7A. He turned toward his laptop, heart racing. When he opened the flash drive and clicked on 7A, his stomach dropped. The tenant listed wasn't a stranger, it was Melissa Harper. His wife. She was leasing another unit in the same building, under her own name. Why, he demanded. She bit her lip. That's where they keep the files, the originals, the ones that can prove everything. I had to rent it in my name so Frank wouldn't suspect, but he found out last week. That's why he's been panicking. Daniel stared at her, disbelief mixing with fear. So you're saying there's evidence in 7A that can clear us both? Yes, she whispered, but we have to get it before he does. A knock at the door made them both jump. 3 sharp taps. They froze. Daniel moved toward the peephole slowly. It was Frank, standing there in the dim hallway light, his expression unreadable. Melissa's voice trembled, don't open it. But Daniel's anger burned hotter than his fear. He unlocked the door. Frank smiled coldly. Evening, lovebirds, thought we should finish our chat. Behind him, in the shadows, was another man, tall, wearing a dark coat. Daniel had never seen him before, but the name came to mind instantly. Blake Harlan. Frank stepped inside without asking, his tone low and dangerous. I told you, Harper, this thing's done. You both should have left while you could. Melissa backed away, clutching Daniel's arm. The taller man finally spoke, his voice calm, measured. You two have something that belongs to me. Daniel's pulse thundered, the files. Blake smiled faintly, good, saves me the trouble of explaining. He gestured toward Melissa, you were supposed to destroy them. She shook her head, not until you clear my husband's name. Blake sighed almost sadly, that's not how this works. Before Daniel could react, Blake nodded at Frank, who pulled something from his coat pocket. A small silver gun. Melissa gasped, stepping back. Daniel froze. The sound of the hammer clicking echoed through the room. And then, a loud crash from the hallway, someone shouting, footsteps. Frank cursed, spinning toward the door. The gun went off. Glass shattered, Melissa screamed. Daniel ducked, grabbing her as they fell behind the couch, the air filled with the sharp sting of gunpowder. When the noise stopped, Frank was gone, so was Blake. The front door hung open, swinging slowly on its hinges. Melissa was shaking uncontrollably. He's going to burn the building, that's what he does when things fall apart, we have to get to 7A now. Daniel grabbed the car keys, helped her up, and together they ran into the night, hearts pounding, toward the elevator that led to the top floor. As the doors closed behind them, the lights flickered once, twice, before plunging the hallway into darkness. And in that final moment before the elevator moved, Daniel realized something horrifying. They weren't alone inside. Someone else was breathing softly behind them. The elevator was pitch black except for a sliver of red light from the floor indicator. Daniel's hand found Melissa's wrist in the dark, her pulse was racing. Then from the back corner came a whisper. "Don't move." Daniel froze, the voice was low, strained, neither Frank's nor Blake. A lighter flared for a second, throwing a flash of orange across a face streaked with blood. It was Michael, the neighbor from 3B. He looked terrified, one sleeve of his shirt was torn and there was a dark smear along his temple. "Thank God you're here," he muttered. "They're setting the place up, gas lines, I tried to stop them." Melissa stepped forward. "Michael, what are you doing here?" "They made me watch the files," he said. "When Frank found out you'd gone rogue, he told Blake, they're cleaning everything, burning evidence, tenants, all of it. You have maybe 10 minutes before this building goes up." Daniel felt his stomach drop. "The gas lines." Michael nodded. "Top floor first, 7A, they've already set the timers." The elevator jolted suddenly and all three of them grabbed the rails as it began to move, upward. "Did you press that?" Daniel hissed. Michael shook his head. The car climbed slow, groaning, the floor numbers blinking faintly, 5, 6, 7. When the doors slid open, a rush of cold air hit them. The hallway was dim, the emergency lights flickering. Smoke was curling faintly from beneath a door at the far end, 7A. Melissa ran ahead, keys shaking in her hand. Daniel and Michael followed. The door resisted at first, then burst open under Daniel's shoulder. Inside, the air was heavy with gas. Papers littered the floor, drawers pulled out, a laptop smashed against the wall, and on the desk sat a small metal timer, its digital numbers counting down from 0 to 15. Daniel's heart hammered. 2 minutes. Melissa darted toward the filing cabinet, coughing. "The originals are here." Michael pulled open windows, trying to vent the fumes. Daniel grabbed the timer, searching for wires, for anything he could rip free, but the casing was sealed. "Melissa, forget the files," he shouted. "No," she gasped, "these prove everything, we can't leave without them. 30 seconds won't matter if we're dead." She ignored him, frantically shoving documents into a folder. The timer flashed 00:45. Michael yelled, "Go, go," and grabbed her arm. Together they ran for the door. Daniel hurled the timer down the hall. It clattered across the tiles. The three of them dove for the stairwell just as a blast of heat slammed into their backs. The explosion tore through the top corridor. Glass and paper rained down. The world became a roar of fire and smoke. They stumbled down the stairs, coughing, choking. Alarms screamed through the building. Somewhere below, people were shouting, doors slamming. When they burst into the lobby, Frank stood there, wild-eyed, waving a gun. "Nobody leaves," he barked. His face was streaked with soot, his shirt half-burned. He looked more desperate than dangerous. "Frank," Melissa screamed, "you'll kill everyone." "That's the idea," he spat. "Wipe it all, start fresh," Blake's orders. "Blake gone," Daniel said, stepping forward slowly. "He ran, you're just his garbage man now." Frank's hand trembled. "You think I won't?" Before he could finish, Michael lunged. The gun fired once, deafening. Frank staggered, staring down at his own chest, then collapsed. "Silence." Smoke seeped through the doorway behind them. The fire was spreading fast. Daniel grabbed Melissa's hand. "We have to go." They ran into the courtyard, sirens wailing in the distance. Neighbors were pouring out of their apartments, coughing, crying. Daniel looked back, flames licking the windows of 7A, black smoke rising into the sky. Melissa clutched the folder to her chest. "We still have it, everything Blake tried to hide, it's all here." Michael coughed hard, dropping to one knee. Blood stained his shirt where Frank's shot had grazed him. Daniel knelt beside him. "You're hit." "I'm fine," Michael rasped. "Just promise me you'll finish it, tell the police everything." He pressed a USB drive into Daniel's hand. Backup files, kept them hidden, Frank didn't know. Then he fell forward unconscious. Paramedics arrived minutes later, dragging hoses, shouting orders. The night blurred into chaos, flashing lights, smoke, sirens, questions. When it was over, they were sitting in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in blankets. A fire captain approached. "We've got fatalities," he said quietly. "Your friend might make it, but it's bad, you folks live here." Daniel nodded numbly. "Then I'm afraid you'll need to talk to the detectives in the morning. We found some interesting documents in the debris. Your names are all over them." Melissa gripped Daniel's hand tightly. He said nothing. By dawn, Willow Court was a black skeleton against the gray sky. They were taken downtown for questioning. Hours passed. Melissa explained everything: how Blake had run the fraud through Frank, how she'd forged leases under pressure, how Daniel had known nothing until the end. When the detective, a tall woman named Ruiz, asked about Blake's whereabouts, Melissa said softly, "He'll disappear, he always does." Ruiz studied them for a long time, then nodded. "We'll verify the evidence. If what you're saying checks out, you might both walk, but you'd better hope those documents survived." They did. The folder Melissa had saved was scorched around the edges, but the signatures, dates, and money trails were clear, enough to unravel the entire scheme. 2 days later, an arrest warrant was issued for Blake Harlan. But he was already gone. The police raided his last known property, a vacant condo downtown, but found only a single envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a printed photo. Daniel and Melissa, taken from across the street through their living room window. On the back, in neat handwriting, were 3 words: "You're welcome, Melissa." When the detective handed it to them, Melissa's face went white. Daniel whispered, "What does that mean?" She stared at the photo for a long time before answering, "It means he's not finished." They were placed under temporary protection, relocated to a hotel under assumed names. For a week, Daniel tried to pretend life was returning to normal, but every knock on the door made him flinch. Every unknown number on his phone felt like a threat. Melissa barely slept. She kept the folder beside her bed, triple-checking the pages each night like a ritual. On the 8th evening, there was a soft tap on their door, not police, housekeeping, supposedly. Daniel opened it halfway. A young woman stood there in a gray uniform, holding a laundry bag. "Service check," she said. He nodded absently and turned to let her in, until he saw her wrist. A small tattoo, the same logo he'd seen on Blake's business card months ago when she'd first shown it to him. The woman smiled faintly. "Mr. Harper, right?" His blood ran cold. Before he could speak, Melissa appeared behind him. She froze, recognition flooding her face. "You." The woman dropped the bag. Inside was no laundry, just a manila envelope. She backed away slowly, eyes flicking toward the stairwell. Daniel snatched the envelope and tore it open. Inside were photos again, different this time, pictures of Frank's house, the burnt leases, and one image that made his knees weaken. A close-up of the forged lease with his signature, but written under it in fresh ink were new words: "Version 2, Daniel Harper approved." Melissa covered her mouth. "He's framing you again." The woman in the hallway smiled thinly. "He says you'll understand." Then she turned and vanished down the stairs. Daniel ran after her, but by the time he reached the lobby, she was gone. Only the echo of her footsteps remained. He went back upstairs, shaking. Melissa was packing the room, clutching the photos. "We have to go to Ruiz," he said, "now." "She won't believe us," Melissa whispered, "not without proof that Blake's still alive." "Then we find him." For 2 days they hunted. Every address Blake had used was empty, every contact number disconnected, until finally Michael, recovering in the hospital, called them. "I remember something," he said weakly. "Blake used to meet someone at an old storage lot off River Road. Unit 49 said it was his backup vault." That night, Daniel and Melissa drove there. The place was deserted, wind howling through rusted fences. They found Unit 49 halfway down the row. The padlock was broken. Inside were boxes, dozens of them, files, receipts, computers, all labeled with code names. Melissa dug through them frantically. These are all his shell companies, real leases, fake tenants, cash laundering, everything. Daniel found a small security camera still blinking in the corner. a red light recording. He pulled the SD card, slipped it into his pocket. Let's get out before he. A voice cut through the darkness, too late for that. They turned. Blake Harlan stood in the doorway, calm as ever, hands in his coat pockets. The faint smell of gasoline hung in the air. I told you, he said softly, you should have burned it all when you had the chance. Melissa stepped forward, defiant. It's over, the police have enough to bury you. He smiled, maybe, but if I go down, I'll make sure you both come with me. He pulled a small remote from his pocket and pressed a button. Somewhere behind him, a spark hissed. The faint crackle of fire spread through the corridor. Daniel lunged, grabbing a metal rod from the floor. Run, he shouted to Melissa. Blake swung the remote like a weapon, but Daniel tackled him. They crashed against the shelves, papers flying, flames licked the walls. Melissa shouted his name, trying to pull the boxes of evidence out before the fire reached them. Blake slammed Daniel to the ground, hands around his throat. His eyes were wild, gleaming. You think she told you the truth? She built this, not me. She just needed someone to blame. Daniel gasped for air. You're lying. Am I? Blake hissed. Who signed the first fake lease, Daniel? Who sent it under your door? The words froze him. The envelope, the very first day, return. His mind spun. Melissa had said she'd check tomorrow, but the next morning she'd been gone early. For the briefest second, doubt flickered. Melissa screamed, swinging a heavy file box. It hit Blake's head. He fell backward, crashing through a stack of crates. Come on, she shouted, pulling Daniel up. They ran through the smoke, coughing as the flames consumed the storage unit. They barely made it to the car before the explosion ripped through the lot, sending a wave of heat across the asphalt. In the distance, sirens wailed again. Hours later, they sat in the police station, soot-covered, exhausted. Daniel handed Detective Ruiz the SD card. This has everything, he said. Recordings of him, the documents, everything. Ruiz nodded. We'll verify it. You did good, Harper. As she walked away, Daniel turned to Melissa. She was staring blankly at the floor, whispering something under her breath. What is it? He asked. She looked up, eyes distant. The first envelope. You think he really sent it? Daniel frowned. What are you saying? She hesitated. I told you I didn't know where it came from, but maybe I did. He felt his chest tighten. Melissa. She closed her eyes. I started it, Daniel, not like this, not the crime, but the idea. I thought if I filled a few empty units under fake names, we'd qualify for the incentive bonus. It was supposed to be harmless. Then Frank found out, then Blake, and everything spiraled. He stared at her, numb. I wanted to fix it, she said, tears falling. I really did, but when you found that first envelope, I panicked. I thought if you hated Frank, you'd never look at me. Daniel stood slowly. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. So he wasn't lying, he said quietly. Melissa reached for him, but he stepped back. Daniel, please, after everything, I still saved you. He shook his head. No, Melissa, you saved yourself. Detective Ruiz returned just then. Good news, she said. We found enough to issue an international alert. Harlan won't get far. She looked at them both. You two should rest, it's over. But as Daniel walked out of the station into the gray morning, he knew it was. Because when he opened his car door, there was an envelope waiting on the seat. White thin. The word return written across the front in blue ink. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A new lease. Tenant Daniel Harper. Co-signer Melissa Harper. Property Willow Court Reconstruction Project. At the bottom a signature, his, perfectly forged again. And beneath it a handwritten note. Welcome home. The wind caught the paper, lifting it from his hands. It fluttered down the street like a ghost, disappearing into the morning light. Daniel watched it go, realizing that some stories don't end with truth or justice. Some just keep renewing, like leases that never really expire. And somewhere in the ashes of Willow Court, another envelope waited to be delivered.